My name is Gary Smith. I am the CEO of Polartec. I'm going to cue this up here. Great. I want to thank Agenda and Mark for having me up here. Before I get into my presentation, though, my price to do this is you have to sit through a 30-second commercial.
Just because it hasn't been made doesn't mean we can't make it. Warmer, drier, lighter, tougher. We are the science of fabric. Polartec, impossible made possible.
We are an innovative producer of premium textiles. We like to think of ourselves as a solutions provider. At the end of the day, we make fabric. We've been doing it for over 100 years. A little bit more about me, my background. I was a partner at McKinsey & Company. I was the head of global supply chain for Timberland, and then ultimately the president of the outdoor group and the work group business. And then together with my wife, we actually own a couple of small core businesses that make products in the bicycling space. One of them is called Independent Fabrication. We make custom bicycles. And the other is Bailey Works. We make bags for cyclists. Both of those brands are over 20 years old. We were in the makers movement before it was a movement. So I guess, for the better part of 35 years now, I've been involved in making things and helping people who make things. So we're here today to talk about conscious consumption and sustainable manufacturing. So I think just pause for a second and provide some definitions, some textbook definitions. Conscious consumption is the psychic value of making good choices when you purchase things. Sustainable manufacturing, and interestingly enough, when you Google this, you come up with a government website that talks about minimizing harm and externalities in the act of actually manufacturing things. Externalities, that's an economist term for when you impose something on somebody else. If you live upstream, you dump stuff in the river, it doesn't bother you, but people downstream are imposed an externality in that case. These topics are kind of ephemeral, and in many ways they're sort of motherhood and apple pie. We could stand up here, we could talk today about things like corporate social responsibility reports, third-party audit services for outsourced factories, etc. But I think it's really important that we probe these topics a little bit deeper. And specific to our genre of apparel, footwear, accessories, which I take most of you are interested in, so much of the consumption that we've been driving for decades now, and in turn the manufacturing of goods, has been driven by this relentless pursuit of low price, enabling the consumption of more volume. And so therefore I think, in that context, the very act of actually consuming something solely based on the immediate gratification of a low price, it's hard to really think about that as being conscious or sustainable in any real measure. So what I want to do is, I want to call bullshit. I think it's a false equivalency. It's a false choice between making good choices, consciously consuming, and sustainable manufacturing, when really what the issue is that's driving things is this notion of low price and this relentless pursuit of low price. So we're all familiar with the blue and the yellow and what that implies. I think we've become addicted as a society, not just in America, but in developed economies around the world. For over 4 decades, it's just been nothing but price, 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 more. And if you want a cultural icon to sort of pin it all on from a dating standpoint, I'm going to blame this guy and the boomer generation. It's really, about 40 years ago is when this sort of cycle really kicked in, and it's hard to imagine where it ends. Just think about BOGOs, Black Friday, Cyber Mondays, and then more recently, Prime Day, really? Prime Day? I mean, come on, that's what we're down to. And so the question just comes, how much stuff do we really need? Okay? The average American purchases over 90 pieces of apparel per year. The average American, much of which never actually even gets worn, or certainly not used to its useful end life. Okay? Think about that. 90 pieces of apparel. And start counting for yourselves. I encourage you to do it. It's actually interesting and somewhat depressing. In effect, we've become Pavlov's dog. We just become addicted to low price. I mean, think about it. How many of you in here, if you're really honest, right, forget fashion, right? We all love fashion, we all want to look good, we all want to be contemporary. But if you'd never bought another piece of apparel or footwear, would you ever run out? If you actually think about your own closet today, now of course we're not all DJ Khalid, and this is pretty awesome on some level, but it's kind of interesting on another level. So really what I want to talk about is the price of price, and what is this relentless pursuit of price, low price, more, and where is it leading? What are the real costs associated with that? Because there is a price of price. And the focus on low cost, I think, has helped create some of the most intractable issues in our society. Overconsumption, middle-class job losses, the extinction of main streets, and now, more recently, shrinking retail sector, okay? You know, it's hard to escape this in the headlines, right? Even this week, Jim Barry announced another closure of 350 doors. You realize that the United States in the last 2 years has shed more retail jobs than the entire coal industry employs. Okay, we have a president of the White House who part of his attainment of the White House was bringing back coal. Maybe you ought to pay attention to retail. Okay. And then things like income disparity, right? I mean, real issues, human rights. So where does this end? You know, where's this focus on price end? You know, it's a race to the bottom. It's not going to end well, and I think we'd all do well, you know, in the apparel, footwear, accessories, to sort of pause and think about, you know, what is this, right? This is an image of an extractive industry. It's a hole in the ground or a mountaintop that's gone. How is that any different than some of the images that we just went through, an empty factory? Right, when the relentless pursuit of lower price forces us to move on in our search for lower cost labor, you know, the next great sourcing environment, et cetera. The only way to continue to get more for less is to chase low cost labor, cut standards, deplete resources. So in this way, you know, footwear, apparel, accessories, we're an extractive industry and we need to own that. I find this image fascinating. Right? This was part of somebody's fashion shoot. A little bit ironic. We're all feeling really good right now. Good vibe in the room. Okay. So let's talk about youth, because really, at the end of the day, you know, these are the folks that are stuck with this, right? How many people in this room were born before 1980? Before 1980. Okay, how many after 1980? All the rest of you. You guys are hosed. Okay? For the first time in modern history, right, this generation, the next generation, has less economic opportunity than their forebears. Right? If you were born between World War II and the early 80s, you had pretty much 100% chance of doing better than your parents. If you've been born since then, you got less than half a chance of doing better than your parents. So all of us who are on that side of the divide, we're good. Right? You know, so again, I think it's important that we pay attention to this. Lots of headlines lately about millennials, right? Millennials is an interesting word, but let's just call it the next generation or youth. Lots of headlines about them killing everything. It's like there's some horror movie, you know, stomping on all these different industries, department stores, Home Depot, so on and so forth. Home ownership, car ownership, fast casual. I think a lot of those headlines are just really missing the point. Okay? And, you know, part of this generation, you know, the previous speaker, professor talked about technology. I think a modern consumer is worth looking at in depth because on the one hand, they don't have to be discerning, right? When it comes to just buying something that really doesn't have a value proposition, see I was paying attention, that's differentiated in any way, shape, or form, right? You can get the lowest price with the least amount of effort. You don't even need to go to a physical store, right? And so technology has enabled modern consumers to purchase commodities, find commodities with the lowest price, the least amount of effort. But also, you know, technology enables that consumer to call bullshit on things, right? You can determine fake from facts. somebody's making a claim about something, it doesn't take very long for that to get ferreted out. So on the one hand, I think a modern consumer is not terribly discerning when it comes to certain types of purchases, and I think that's just the reality. And if you play in that kind of space where you're selling a product that doesn't have anything to differentiate itself other than price, you better have the lowest cost structure. You better be able to pursue the lowest cost structure, or else you're going to be out of business in fairly short order. The flip side of that, though, and I think what's worth for everyone in this room to pay attention to, is I think the modern consumer, in this case the hipster thinker at the coffee shop, really has the ability and the social imperative, frankly, to be a very discerning consumer. I also think that consumer has demonstrated in a number of cases that they're more than willing to pay a premium for product that resonates with their values. And so if you take anything away from my talk, right, the point I want to make is price is only ever an issue in the absence of value. Okay? So what I want to spend a little bit of time is talking about value and the different ways to create value and think about value. So again, price is only ever an issue in the absence of value. Brands that wish to be truly sustainable, I think you've got a couple different options, and ideally if you can play on both ends of the spectrum, you need to create tangible value, or you need to create intangible value, or ideally both. A couple of examples here. My personal favorite down at the bottom. We invented recycled fabric in 1993 using recycled, repurposed beverage bottles. Last year we passed 1 billion bottles of usage. We don't tell that story very well because we're the intel inside, so we don't have the opportunity necessarily to always have a conversation with our customers or end consumers. But other folks do it and do a good job for us. Patagonia, in this particular case, that fabric in that garment is a Polartec fabric. So what do I mean by tangible? I think there's lots of different cases. In this particular case, we're talking about product-based, solid quality, durable materials, good materials, lasting, historical equity. A brand like Pendleton's been around for over 100 years. Doesn't mean you can't start a new brand and build that equity over time, but when you see this product, you see that brand, you see that mark, you think of durable, you think of quality, you think of tangible elements of value. Professor talked earlier about Apple. I think whenever you can get people to line up and camp outside your stores for the next version of whatever, you've done something right. In this case, I think you've done a good job of both creating tangible and intangible value. There's something about having to have the latest and greatest. My kids, if they don't have the latest iPhone, they're not cool. Or if they don't have the right color. Okay? So they've done a really good job of both technology innovation in a tangible sense, as well as creating that psychic value, that need, the brand aura, the local community, et cetera. So, winning brands, both today and more importantly tomorrow, relevant to a youth consumer, I think you really need to focus on creating real value and using that as a weapon. It's not something that's necessarily governed by lower price. So I just want to go through some examples of different types of value creation. Hard to tell what this picture is, but if you look closely, it's a GoPro. What's GoPro, right? It's a camera. Well, what's GoPro's cameras? Without the ability to attach them to things. I would argue that the tangible, functional superiority value that GoPro created and brings to their customers is not necessarily the camera itself, because lots of things take good quality pictures today, but it's the mounting system and that ecosystem of mounting devices that they've created around it. So it's a great example, in my opinion, of functional superiority in creating real value. Another example of a brand that I think does a really good job of creating real quality, real durable, real lasting value is Filson. Fantastic if you ever get a chance and you're in Seattle, walk in this, the flagship store in Seattle. First thing you see when you walk in is you see glass wall, people making product. And it's equal parts history lesson about the equity and durability of the brand and functionality of the brand, and then it's just a phenomenal store that's merchandised really well. Product that you want to buy, you'd be happy to own, proud to own. you know, these guys do arguably the best job in the business around shared values, reflected values, making you feel good, you know, relative to social status. I think the amount of logo wear that Patagonia is selling these days in the form of hats and t-shirts is just simply phenomenal. It's one of the fastest growing parts of their business, simply because people just want to wear that brand and reflect externally what that brand means to them in terms of social status relative to the values of the brand. And then something else that I think is pretty fascinating is this notion of creating an authentic experience. So, you know, particularly for a young customer, if you can't consume as much as your parents did, certainly what you do consume, you want to get an experience with it. You know, fascinating fact that really kind of stopped me in my tracks is that in 2016 in the United States, for the first time ever, Americans spent more money eating out than they did in grocery stores. And what's really driving that is youth. Youth are fascinated by spending time and money eating out. Why? Because it's an experience, it's social. And the whole food movement is more relevant, I would argue, today to a lot of youth than what brands and what apparel and shoes that they're wearing. So just something to reflect on about this notion of creating an authentic experience. Here you have a couple of examples. Big, well-known brand, in the case of Porsche, right up the road in Carson. They just opened up the second Porsche Experience Center in the United States. The first one's in Atlanta, where their corporate headquarters is for North America. What these are is they are playgrounds for people who like cars. You can actually go there, and for a small fee, you can drive the cars in a variety of different experiences, everything from an off-road test course to skid pads and a handling circuit. It's a great way to sell cars. It's a very different way of selling cars. There's museums, there's events. It literally says Experience Center on the outside of the building. The one in Atlanta cost over $220 million. It was actually interesting. When I report over to the public, it was used in the filming of the last Avengers movie because it's such a cool building. It's right at the end of the runway in Atlanta Airport, so if you ever get stuck there and you want to go hang out and at least see something, there's a cafe there. And the one next to it, Requestable, is a small brand out of Salt Lake City called Cotopaxi. Cotopaxi is a brand that's started up in the outdoor space. They make apparel and packs and accessories. And what they do is they run this Requestable adventure race series where it's a combination of adventure race in an urban setting, but tied into social justice activities, cleaning up a neighborhood or cleaning up a riverfront and whatever, and there's music and there's food, etc. So it's a great way for them to get exposure to their customers and buy people into the notion of doing something good in the act of purchasing and being part of the brand. So those are just some examples of, you know, functional superiority, you know, real quality, durability, you know, the reflection of shared values in the case of Patagonia, and then this notion of creating an authentic experience. So just 4 different ways in which to think about, as a brand, how are you actually building real value and bringing real value to your consumers. I want to close by talking about a brand that maybe some of you have heard of, that I think is just doing a phenomenal job of both providing tangible and intangible value. Shinola Detroit, right? They started out making watches. Anybody know the history of Shinola as a brand name? There's an old saying, you don't know shit from Shinola. Right? Shinola was a shoe polish brand. And so you don't know shit from shoe polish. That's where that saying comes from. It's kind of an old guy saying. And so the folks behind this resurrected that brand and did it with the purpose of bringing premium, high-quality products to market. They started out with watches, bicycles, leather goods. They're adding things as we speak. What's fascinating about it is they did it in Detroit. And anybody who's been around for a little while knows that Detroit's been a difficult environment for economic success. And so they're actually doing it in Detroit, not just headquartering their company, but they're actually making the product in Detroit. So I think on the tangible side of things, it's hard to argue with the quality of the product, right? It's a beautiful product, it's well designed, part of the experience is phenomenal. If you go into a store, the stores all, you know, are set up in a way to kind of capture that experience. They have a watch bar where you can actually build your watch, pick, mix and match faces and band selection and colors and so on, and just reflect that sort of notion of being a manufacturer and being a premium product and giving you choice. The last thing that I want to share with you, I just want you to pause on this photo for a moment. This is actually a picture of the crew that makes their leather goods. And what's really striking about this picture, right, is if you look at it, first of all, more than half of the people in that picture are women. Okay? And more than half of the people in that picture are people of color. And to my knowledge, they don't have some corporate HR program to go out and fulfill, some sort of diversity program. What are they doing? They're just simply hiring people from the neighborhood. And so their workforce reflects the place in which they chose to operate and make things, which is just, it's awesome. I mean, how could you not feel good about buying products that are made by folks that look like that work and live in the neighborhood in which the business is set up? So great product, well designed, well thought out, and doing good in a place that certainly needs it. And the brand is just, it's off to the races, doing a phenomenal job. So I just want to close again by going back to this notion of, think hard about what it is that you're doing. Are you simply putting a product out there that doesn't have a differentiated tangible value proposition, to go back to the professor's speech, or intangible, a psychic component to it? Again, ideally both. Because the notion of consumption, look, we're all in business, we all want to grow, we all want to make things, we all want to sell things. The notion of consumption itself, in the context of the way it's been played out over the last 40 years, that's just, it's hard to see where that ends well. We're only, I think, at the tipping point of, some pretty difficult times when it comes to the sort of traditional retail environment. Again, those of you born after the 80s, you have a tougher haul when it comes to creating economic opportunity for yourselves and your families than the generation that came before. And this isn't a nationalistic thing. It's not just about the United States, it's about developed economies around the world in general. I had a very fascinating conversation in the hallway yesterday with someone who is a principal at a firm that helps people build brands. And his business is getting lots of inquiries from Asian contract manufacturing firms that want to vertically integrate and create their own brands. They're tired of being, doing the hard part, the dirty part, and getting the least amount of value out of the value chain. And so they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, I've got all this capability. I take all this risk. I've got all this invested capital. I have all these people that I have to employ. Why shouldn't I just create my own brand? And make a double-digit margin instead of a single-digit margin. So I just think there's a lot of, I'm not sure what the so what, for you all to take away, other than price is only ever an issue in the absence of value. And if you want to have a conversation about conscious consumption and sustainable manufacturing, I would just encourage you to think really hard about the value that you're bringing forward. So thank you for your time. I'll be around a little bit later if anybody has any questions.